get our team together, and one of my team members is here actually with me. We are working together. She could not find the internet connection in her hotel, so making it work, and pretty excited about this event. This is our GitHub page. I want to start with this because we have a member introduction in here, and then we have kind of put whatever we have in our slide. So this is how our GitHub README file looks like right now. And trying to find the slide. I need to move this away so I can. Oh, so we have a really good combination of two people really good at coding and programming, and two people talking from their experience and bringing up ideas like what we can do. And in this short period of time, it was really good. So then we ended up with a topic which is management priority areas in response to biomass pattern driven by various disturbance. So the motivation for this topic was related to, like, we have this current pattern of biomass distribution over this landscape of Southern Rocky Mountain, but this is driven by the past pattern of anthropogenic, as well as we have big history of how management as well as the climate change has resulted into this big biomass and where it is in the landscape. So the idea is to identify those areas and to prioritize the management activities. For that, our objective was to identify and understand the high management priority areas based on current biomass pattern, and also topographic factors in the Southern Rocky Mountain ecoregions, because we have this biomass distribution that has also gone through the ecological process of insect and fire disturbances, and how this is a management challenge because we have the complex topography. So we take into consideration of topographic variables like slope and elevation. For that, our main variables and the data sources is listed here, which is first is biomass. We wanted to know what are the potential area of the biomass, which is the raster layer, and then we overlay with that with the FIA data and identified these potential growth places. And then we also had the disturbance layer from the disturbance stack landfire data, and we know where the disturbance has occurred over past from 1999 to 2022, and based on that, we also now we know in the landscape where we need management, but it also depends on need management versus what is accessible. Can we do the management even based on the topographic factor like elevation and slope? So we consider the certain elevation from above 1600 to 2800 meters above sea level, and the slope from 0 to 40%. So that these are our variables and the data source that we took for the analysis, which Chatham is going to talk further. Thank you.
Can we put the slides in present mode, please? You can go file and then present so they look a little bigger. Yeah, thanks. Maybe you can. Sorry, try view.
Maybe I can stop sharing and you can start sharing your slide. You want to take control over, Martha?
Yeah, hang on.
Yeah.
Cool. So we looked at a biomass product. I know this is kind of different and wasn't in the data store, but the temporal range of this product was pretty interesting to us because it goes all the way back to 2003. It does only go until 2019. It's from Chorus, and it's openly available from Microsoft's Planetary Computer. So we got to work with cloud tools like PyStack and Xarray to work with this data. Unfortunately, we just have one static image of 2003 here. I could not make a GIF, which is sad, but that's fine. One of the limitations of this project, despite its temporal resolution, is it's pretty high. It's pretty low resolution spatially, so it didn't end up being that useful for us, but it was still cool to look into a new data set. Jiaming will talk about growth potential now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So yeah, when we think of the carbon dynamics in the forest, then there are several key aspects that can contribute to that change. One of them is the sequestration potential, and because trees at different age group would be different in their ability to sequester carbon. So here I pulled the tree age information from FIA's database, and I was able to identify which trees that have been repeatedly measured, and then calculate the the annual biomass growth rate between the two visits, and then plot the growth rate against the tree age for each common species. And the color here shows the number of trees in each age group. So because of the limitation of the ground measurements, it's hard to really core every single tree. So we have limited data availability in the tree age. For some species, as expected, we can see a trend of increasing at a young age, and then after a certain age, the growth rate becomes stable or decreases. Like we can see some of those in the Douglas fir, Ponderosa pine. Also, the first group only has less than 10 trees, so we can just basically rule that out. And also in quaking aspen. So this is kind of an individual tree level result. This way I can identify a median growth value of carbon growth at a certain age for a specific species. So then to identify where trees have the highest growth potential, I was able to determine the dominant species for each forest plot and the average age of that plot, and then calculate the plot level biomass growth rate. Next slide, please, Martha. Thank you. So this is kind of a messy figure. It shows the Colorado state boundary and plot level growth rate at their current age at the first locations. And of course, I sort of simplified the problem because this is just under the ideal condition or hypothesis that of no disturbance at all. The color is different species. The size of the dots are the normalized growth rate. So if we compare between different species, for example, I'm seeing the plots dominated by Ponderosa pine in the darker green color, and quaking aspen in the lighter green color. The growth rate of Ponderosa pine is just less than quaking aspen. And then if for a single species, it's also, it can, the growth potential could also be different across space. For example, the Douglas fir in the yellow color. So here in the western area, it's quite small growth rate, but here it's larger. Maybe it's because they are really old here, or because of the elevation difference. That's something that we can look into afterwards. So we can definitely see some interesting patterns from this result. And then next slide, please, Martha. Yes, so another key aspect of forest carbon dynamics is its vulnerability to disturbance. And here are the maps are generated from open source disturbance intensity maps that are based on Landsat. In the annual maps, the disturbance intensity is estimated as a percentage of visual area removal, and such historical time series data can give a sense of where partial disturbance is more likely to happen, where stand clearing is more likely to happen, and where's the area that has most disturbance occurrences during the 30 years time period frame. And so from the maps, we can see in Colorado, mostly it's just only one disturbance during the 30 years, but there are also some darker pixels indicating there could be up to 4 times of disturbance during the 30 years. Yeah, I should use better color map for this. So these can all have impact on how carbon stock would change and what should be the priority area that we want the management to focus on. Yeah. So next slide, please. So this is a nice figure plotted by our Martha. So this is from the lead fire disturbance stack in our data store, and basically it counts the number of disturbance by the year within Colorado State, and the color indicates the different disturbance type, insects or fires, and there are some obvious specs in the year 2017, 2018, 2019, and also this darker bar here is the severe insect outbreak, I believe. So compared to the previous 20 or so years, we have more and more disturbance in recent years. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, that's Martha. Do you want to take it?
Yeah. We also looked at the land fire data to understand what types of land management and fuel treatment happen in Colorado. And then this data set was really interesting, and there was a lot to dive into, and we didn't really have time to go as far as we wanted. But one of the ways we tried to understand it is the total number of acres treated annually by the different agency types. I am really curious to know what happened in 2017 and kind of the years around then. There's pretty big spikes. And then if we go back to our other graphs, that does make sense. Maybe this is related to the increase in the beetle incidents. We're not going back to the other slide. Oh shoot, we're going the wrong direction. Yeah, so I think these spikes are kind of occurring at similar time spans. That is encouraging that there's more management as the forest is getting more disruptive, more disturbed. And I'm not sure if this is really typical. Do we expect to see that the state and US Forest Service are working with the most acres because they kind of like have control over the most acres in Colorado? We're not sure, but maybe that's the case. Or maybe this graph is skewed because we focused on fuel treatments that had a minimum size of 100,000 acres. So maybe other agency types do mitigation on a smaller scale. Another way we started to understand management is to look at the different types of practices. Again, total acres per year, and there were 4 main types of forest treatment that occurred. And then in general, it seems like other mechanical and thinning are most commonly used in Colorado, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so kind of some topographic factors. I mean, we have a lot of data if you compile all these different layers together. And so we needed to create some parameters, based on what's feasible with mechanical thinning operations throughout the Southern Rockies. Only certain machinery can make it on certain slopes. And then as you go up in elevation, you're also gonna increase your level of rocky terrain, which you wouldn't be able to do like mechanical thinning operations in those areas. And then we find that it's most feasible also in the montane, so that 1,600 to 2,800 meters in elevation. Next slide. And then just a deeper dive into just like where those locations are across Colorado, and kind of what data would fall into that, and then into the area of Colorado, and then beyond that, just in the Southern Rockies within those elevation parameters and slope parameters, so that we know just the data that needs where the management would make the most impact.
Okay, now we're gonna try a live demo. We'll see how this goes. If I can escape this PowerPoint. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get this to render on GitHub, which is kind of a bummer. But what we have is an interactive map where we're starting to combine the layers. We only have 2 layers right now, but hopefully the goal is we combine all these different factors to start to see where treatment should be applied. I also don't know how to color code things, so everything is black, which is unfortunate, but we'll get there. What we're looking at here is the difference disturbance data plotted spatially in relation to the treatment data. So this is a pretty big fire. This might be Cameron Peak Fire. Tatum, correct me if I'm wrong. And then if we go and look at the perimeter, there were some fuel treatments applied nearby. If we toggle over them, that's not that near, but there was a thinning nearby. It's pretty interesting to just kind of start to scroll around and explore this data. We didn't really get anything actionable from this. But we tried a different package. Like traditionally Folium has been used for kind of basic interactive visualizations. But as I'm sure some people have encountered before, when you have a lot of really complex polygons, Folium starts to break down. I think since we're constrained within Colorado and the Southern Rockies, we probably would have been fine with Folium. But I wanted to work with a new package. So we worked with Longboard that was developed from Development Seed, which is pretty cool. And they have demos of that package rendering millions of polygons and point data. So if you are trying to visualize large data sets, I encourage you to check it out. Yes, we'll go back to our slides now.
I know that we are definitely ending, getting close to our time cutoff. But yeah, these were just other considerations. If time and data were unlimited, you know, this is what we would consider. A lot of this data, considering some of the FIA data that was put together by Colorado State Forest Service about carbon stock density, we'd love to include that. Distances to the WUI, and other watershed, water storage and other utilities. And then also considering any type of data that we're missing that would be relevant, whether that's land ownership, private land, forest management, that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much, Team 3. I think we're gonna have to call it there. But this work is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for the time and effort that went into this. And those, yeah, the live demos make me want to like zoom in and see more about what's going on. I just posted the link to the survey. Everyone should be able to access that. Let me know if you have any issues. There should be a link to the team website and GitHub there. And yeah, if you can sort of just take a minute or two, check out what they did and what their documentation looks like, give them a rating, and then in just a few minutes, we'll get going with our next team.
Hey, Tyler, just a quick clarification. So that survey link, fill that out for each team, and it looks like you can pick which team it is. So it's
Yeah, so just select
cool.
3 and fill it out. And then next time I'll send the link out again and you'll just select the different team that you're rating. And then it'll all go into the same spreadsheet so that I can add up points.
Tyler, Does everyone on the team also need to evaluate ourselves? Like, do we need to?
Yes, actually, if you want to do a self-evaluation, yeah, why don't we have everybody do a self-evaluation also?
Gotcha.
And our next team is Team 6. So whoever's leading for Team 6, if you want to start getting things pulled up, and I'll give you a go ahead in just a second.
You said team 6, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. Okay. Can people see my screen correctly?
Still starting up for me, and yep, there we go. And just to clarify,
Okay,
I will
great.
let you know when you hit your 10-minute mark, and we're going to do a hard cutoff at 15 minutes.
Sounds good. Okay. Let me know whenever we're okay to start.
Go right ahead, I think.
Okay. Is the rest of my team here? Just making sure.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Team 3. That was a fabulous presentation to watch. And so thank you all for joining in on Team 6. So the project that we worked on this week is titled Above Ground Biomass Legacies, Predicting Trajectories of Post-Disturbance Recovery Across the Southern Rocky Mountain Ecoregion. So we made a little bit of an abstract here that you can see on our team website. Here we, state that forests play a vital role in mitigating climate change and how important they are. That's why we're all here, because we have a common shared passion for forest carbon, right? So what we did is that we wanted to look at JEDI data, since it provides a high resolution laser footprints of forest at larger spatial scales. There, they were able to enable estimates of above ground biomass density, and we could use these biomass density footprints from the JEDI data in combination with disturbance histories such as wildfire, drought, and insect outbreaks. There, we could look at those disturbance histories from 20 years prior, and kind of look at how has it been recovering since those disturbances. And then we also created a model where we trained it to further predict recovery trajectories, and then also do a little bit of data interpolation with the JEDI data, since there was some data gaps essentially in the original data set that we were given. So with our project question, we have 3 overarching questions. The first one being, what is the relative importance of different disturbance combinations in shaping above ground biomass density? Second, how do post-disturbance biomass trajectories vary among disturbance types and combinations? And third, do models that include information about disturbances, can they predict a biomass density better than null models or models that cannot? And so our ultimate goal of this project was to kind of understand the trajectories using the JEDI data and also random forest modeling of above ground carbon recovery across these combinations of disturbances. We wanted to aim to understand these trajectories and then create a predictive model to then interpolate the JEDI footprint data and understand how these disturbances impact the biomass density. And I'm going to pass it on to Tyler.
Thanks, Natalie. So we used a data set that has been kind of generated over the last year by folks that were involved in a previous ESIIL workshop. And so big shout out to Tyler McIntosh for putting a lot of work into organizing that data set. And like Natalie described, that data set included above ground modeled above ground biomass density provided by JEDI. And we used the footprint version of that rather than the gridded above ground product that they have available now. And that was kind of the response variable that we were trying to both model wall-to-wall across space and understand the drivers of that. And so the predictors or features that we used in our model were geographic location, 30-year normals of climatic water deficit and AET from Holden et al., tree cover from MODIS, peak NDVI from Landsat, forest type from NLCD, time since various disturbances that were compiled into the disturbance stack that Earth Lab folks have provided to us, and those are based on Landsat imagery. And those disturbance types included fire, insect outbreak, and hotter drought, following the Hammond et al. Definition of hotter drought. So we'll start by showing some exploratory data analysis that we did to kind of give you a bit more information about the data set they were working with. So here you can see a map of the spatial distribution of the JEDI data across the Southern Rockies ecoregion. And these are colored by the above ground biomass density, and it's on a log scale. And just a couple points to note here. So these dots are not to scale. So the JEDI footprints are 25-meter footprints. And so although it looks like it's a continuous thing when you plot it this way, really there are gaps in between. So if we wanted to kind of produce a high resolution gridded product, we need to do some sort of modeling or interpolation to do that. So a couple other points here. You can see towards the southern end of this, you can see the artifacts of the satellite tracks there. So that just kind of helps understand how those data are collected by the satellite. And then there's a couple kind of rectangular gaps here where there were data quality flags. So that's kind of our response variable across space. Another view on this where we've modified these points to reflect the disturbance data. And so you can see sort of those similar patterns in terms of the spatial patterning of above ground biomass. You can keep going. And I will turn it over to Kylan to say a bit more about our modeling approach and the results of that.
Hey, cool. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Natalie. So to get a baseline model to compare against as a first pass, our null model was basically a simple spatial interpolation using inverse distance weighting that Tyler did. And so our goal then was to get a model that did better than that. And so in the interest of doing something relatively simple that works in a short time span, we trained a random forest model using 13 predictor variables. And the full details of this are all on the website and the methods with the exact, here's a little bit. So this describes the baseline null model. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's the example of that weighted interpolation. And so this is the one we were trying to beat. And if you scroll down a little bit more, there should be we used, so our original goal was to use a spatial random forest model, and there's an R package for that. We realized that doing the spatial part just from the distance computations was going to be a little tricky. So we scaled back, and even though we're using the spatial RF package, it's just a simple non-spatial random forest model using 13 predictor variables that some of the ones that were described: year since disturbance, location, climatic variables. We also tried to get a crude idea of capturing interactions between these disturbances to answer some of those original research questions. So we also included variables that were just multiplying year since drought times year since fire, year since drought times year since insect, to kind of get a scale of like these compounding disturbances. And then we did a relatively small random forest with a pretty large node size, just to try to get something that'll train quickly. And then if we go down to model evaluation, so I think it's possible that a couple of things, as we were throwing things together this morning, got a little bit out of order, but the basic takeaway is that the R squared for the random forest model is around 0.35. For the simple baseline model is around 0.2. Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. Awesome. And then the RMSE was lower for the random forest models as well. It's not a massive difference, but it is something for sure. And you can see that histogram of the residuals. So we're doing a little bit better with the random forest model than with the baseline model. But we weren't just trying to train a model to beat a baseline model. We also wanted this model to try to get at the idea of how impactful are these disturbances on forest carbon, and especially the interactions between these disturbances. So if we look at the variable importance plot, it seems like years since drought is pretty important. Years since fire is relatively important. And then some of these interactions between variables, years since fire and years since drought, years since drought and years since insect. Years since insect by itself didn't seem to be particularly impactful on the model, which is interesting. And then if we go down a little bit more, we can get a sense of exactly how these are doing. So these are some variable response curves and surfaces. So we hold the other variables constant and vary these disturbance variables. So years since fire, years since drought. And we get a sense of kind of this decline in forest carbon, or sorry, in above ground biomass, and also forest carbon we'd expect after the initial disturbance, and then a rebound near the end. And that holds true for fire, drought. It's maybe a little bit less so with insect, which makes sense looking at the variable importance plot. And then this surface right below this gives us a little more insight into the interaction between fire and hot drought. And so what is interesting here is there's a bit of a well, or let's say there's a bit of a well in above ground biomass in about the 5 to 10 years since a fire and 10 to 15 years since drought when they co-occur. And so that's interesting. We're looking at the lowest above ground biomass density when there are successive drought and fire disturbances, with 10 to 15 years since drought, 5 to 10 years since fire. So this model, even though it's just a first pass, gets us a sense of maybe how these disturbances, when they co-occur, are impacting each other. All right, and then I think I'll pass it over to Luis to talk a little bit about these recovery trajectories and interpreting these results.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I'll make this quick. So this is some recovery trajectories generated from our empirical data. So this is just from the JEDI data and our disturbance stack data. This is without our interpolation. So this shows when we look at how many years it's been since our 3 disturbances, we can see the shifts in above ground biomass density. And we're seeing this kind of curve with that well around like 10, 15 years since a lot of the disturbances, and then sort of a uptick, a recovery at the end after the 20-year mark. And I think I'll turn it back over to Tyler for some discussion.
Great. So yeah, just to wrap up, some of these results at first were a little bit counterintuitive. We expected that recovery would sort of be more of a increasing trend over time. And as we thought more about this, we kind of generated this sort of working model of what we think might be going on here. So the thing with the JEDI data is that it doesn't separate live and dead biomass pools. So if we imagine that after a disturbance, there's a lot of now dead biomass, and over time through decomposition and snagfall, that standing dead biomass is going to decline. And then concurrently, tree regeneration and seedling establishment, that live biomass pool is going to increase. And so the kind of cumulative result there in the black line in the example of a successful recovery, we have sort of this U-shaped curve where we have declines as snags fall and biomass decomposes that then recovers as the forest recovers. And then in these dashed lines, we could imagine what this would look like in a situation where we had failed regeneration or failed recovery. And we have sort of these declining trends in above ground biomass density over time in those cases. I think that, and we want to just give some time here for Luis to talk about a bit more about the art that he did.
Yeah, these are just some like watercolor sketches I did of some of the ideas I had for my art project. So that shows the same site, it's a spot in Boulder that I like to go before, like during or immediately after, and then recovering from a disturbance.
That's us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Team 6. I just dropped in the survey. It should be the same survey, and you should be able to submit another response to it. Just make sure that you're selecting Team 6 at the top instead. And we will be doing self-evaluation. So Team 6, you can also take a look at that. In a few minutes here, we'll get going with Team 2. So I don't know who's starting, but if you want to share screen or do anything like that.
Just give us 1 second, please. Okie dokie. I'll start by sharing my screen. So I've been struggling to get up
all of the images because they're way too big and all these GIFs and all that jazz. So I'm hoping I'll get that up and the website will render and all that jazz. But for now, I'm going to be presenting from the Markdown preview of what our site would look like. It hasn't been reviewed or anything. There's probably typos throughout. We sort of rushed to put this together, like we are all very aware. So yeah, I guess just to get started, we kind of struggled a lot to figure out like what our topic was going to be around forest disturbance. We struggled with figuring out a topic that hasn't already been done without doing a bunch of lit review. We struggled to figure out like which data sets would be relevant. We spent some time digging around for pretty much the full first day to get a sense of like what available data sets were there, and a lot of really amazing data sets, but we ended up going with two that were not in the data store. So at a very, very high level, we wanted to see, the theme was just disturbance, and we kind of left it free form. We don't really have an explicit research question. I've always been sort of like a hammer is in search. I've always been more of like a hammer looking for a nail type of person rather than a nail looking for a hammer type of person. So I'm somewhat biased in the things that I want to do. I do machine learning. I build canopy heights. I wanted to build big, pretty maps, and hopefully pick a data set that I haven't worked with before that would give something that's somewhat novel. So that's what we tried to do. We used GLAD's analysis ready data set. And what's unique about this data set, well, I'll take a step backwards. So basically what the project does is tries to build a canopy height model using JEDI RH98 as a proxy for canopy height. And the input data that we use is GLAD ARD. GLAD ARD is an analysis ready data set put out by Hansen Group, developed, I think, primarily by Peter Potapov, who's put out a ton of canopy height and biomass papers. He's the one that leads the whole GLAD group. I'm sure we've all worked with like a lot of their data sets. But what's really unique about this data set is that it actually harmonizes across Landsat missions and does temporal coherence and consistency globally. So what that gives us is a relatively unique data set beyond what I think is easily generated by FORCE or what is openly available by HLS. HLS strictly sticks to Landsat 8. But what this data set gives us is basically temporally consistent Landsat bands all the way back to Landsat 5. So that is roughly 1997 to 2023. So I figured, okay, cool. There's, at Pachama, one of the main things that I've struggled with is just general interannual variations in the input data, which has a drastic effect on predictions of CHM. And we're always sort of searching for a better data set that has more like temporal consistency. And I think that's probably what a lot of people in other groups that do very similar things do, using FORCE, for example, or HLS. So yeah, long story short about the GLAD ARD is that think of it as Landsat from 1997 to 2023. So what we do in this paper is then regress that onto JEDI spaceborne LiDAR, specifically the relative height metric 98th percentile as a proxy for canopy height, which we may know that is, it varies between ecoregion. I'm not an ecologist, so don't quote me on anything with that respect. So yeah, our objective is to model JEDI relative height metric 98th percentile as a proxy for canopy height using GLAD ARD globally consistent and normalized dataset, and apply the model to generate wall-to-wall estimates of RH98 from 1997 to 2023. Give it 1 second. I think it's just loading. Wait, what the? Uh-oh. Sorry, 1 sec. Oh no.
Hey Len, so before we present like the GLIDE visualization, I can like show a quick visualization using Land Trender, which I did.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I think you just need to unshare your screen and then I can share mine. Cool. Yeah, so this is supposed to be a GIF image using Land Trender, and it's basically showing shortwave infrared, near infrared, and red visualization or band combination visualization of the entire Southern Rockies region from 1997 all the way to 2022 or 2019 actually. So if I just do, yeah. We didn't have too much time to analyze this, but it seems like the red and infrared is signature is increasing over time. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Len again for the visualization using GLAD. Oh, you're talking on mute, Len.
Do you guys see my screen up here with tiles like back to the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so kind of just to sort of wrap things up here, hopefully the use cases, hopefully what we're trying to do is clear. The presentation, not very clear, needs some work. Basically, we want to build wall-to-wall maps of RH98 from 1997 to 2023. This extends a larger time horizon than typical canopy height products. Planet goes back to 2013. A lot of other products tend to struggle to go back before 2013 because that involves like complete different Landsat mission, along with other data sets that aren't available, like JAXA, ALOS Pulsar, and synthetic aperture radar. So first, I basically just get all of GLAD ARD's tiles. I intersect it with our area of interest. I realize that that's a lot of data. GLAD ARD is on 16-day intervals. So that's like 23 periods per year for 26 years would be like 600 scenes. At approximately 200 megabytes would be like 120 gigabytes per tile. And there's about 20 of them here. So yeah, there'd be like 2 terabytes of data of processing. So we stick with one single tile over this area of interest. We go and download all the data from GLAD. It's about 120, 150 gigabytes. We do the simplest flag, quality flag masking, where we have clear sky. This is a GIF of GLAD ARD RGB from 1997 to 2023. There's a bunch of things that you could notice. First things first, if you've ever built a GIF from Landsat data across multiple missions, there is significant variation, even interannually within a single mission. But what's nice about this product is that we have relatively temporal consistent things. So what you're seeing here is just median composition with the most basic quality flag per year over the last 20-something years from 1997. So this is basically our input data. We also have 2 SWIR bands and 1 near infrared band. And then JEDI, I go and kick off JEDI to actually get rasterized 25-meter RH98 bands from Earth Engine. Tips get dumped into my personal drive. I upload them all to Portal, to the data store, and then we merge the RH98 band with all of the other bands available in GLAD ARD. What we did here for this actual pre-processing is to reproject and resample all of GLAD ARD onto JEDI, because you want to be careful with reprojecting, resampling, introducing geolocation errors, especially if you're considering RH98 to RH98 to be your like ground truth. It's important to not transform it too much. Tyler, how am I doing on time? Do we have 5 more minutes? I haven't even been paying attention.
So yeah, you got 5 minutes to hard cut off.
Cool. Yeah, so at the end of the day, with this X-ray data set, we have about 1 million training points. Oh no. We have about 1 million training points with 7 covariates, and those 7 covariates are RGB, NIR, red, SWIR1, SWIR2, and some thermal band. We use the most basic gradient boosted regression tree algorithm using XGBoost with default parameters, but using the L1 loss objective, like mean absolute error. This takes about 30 seconds. Here's our 1-to-1 plot. We have an R-squared of 0.14. Not very impressive, but it trained down, so I was happy. It learned something. Mean absolute error is like in reasonable range, but we see that there's definitely a disparity between the predicted and measured values. If we look at the histograms between predicted and measured, we see the usual things of saturation in Landsat, making it hard for our model to sort of predict the right tail of our distribution in the underlying target data. So it's really hard for our model, and this is typical, it's really hard for the model to make accurate predictions of high data, of larger data values here. And you can see that, we predict up to like, 22, 23, but we have a lot of measured values above that threshold. So I like these plots. They can kind of tell you a decent amount of information. Yeah, so anyways, given that we have a model, we train it over all of our training data, we're able to make some very basic predictions over our area of interest from 1997 to 2023. And for me, this is relatively novel because a lot of the covariates we use at Pachama are usually end at like 2013. But a lot of like Vera methodologies require that there hasn't been any deforestation in the last 10 years and things like that. And so if you're trying to, let's say a project started 10 years ago, then you need to check 10 years before that. We're already out of range for a typical modeling approach for canopy height. So what's really exciting for me about this is that we're able to look further back in time to get a sense of canopy height. We can see this pretty large fire event in Jefferson County. I forgot what the name of that fire is. We can see that this fire happened before 1997. So yeah, basically to wrap it up, there's a ton more things to investigate here. All of these data sets are also in our data store, which I don't know if this link's going to work or not, but we have all the ZAR files for all the merged data sets and predictions and all the GIFs and stuff like that, if anybody wants to pick up where we left off. But yeah, further items for investigation would be better quality flag application for both GLAD and JEDI. We could do a higher temporal resolution, like modeling at quarterly or monthly intervals. We could do, we can include other covariates like environment variables, slope, ecoregion, etc. Better estimates of our model performance using spatial cross validation. Keep doing that. And we could do other things like feature engineering, feature selection, hyperparameter tuning. We could go beyond pixel-based predictions. Instead of using pixels, let's use some larger approaches like patches or chips in order to take advantage of spatial correlation using neural networks. We could calibrate JEDI to ALS in the area so that we get more meaningful results. As we saw up here in the histograms of our predictions, it's really hard for our model to predict anything less than 3 meters, which is expected. And we could also add ALS for training, and we could validate on ALS. So yeah, in conclusion, yeah, we sort of struggled to find a topic. We wanted something that would be something that's somewhat novel. So we came up with the idea of using GLAD ARD dataset that has some nice temporal harmonization consistency with applications to canopy height using JEDI's RH98. And we wanted to do a lot more with this around disturbance and things like that, but pretty stoked to get to this point of at least having predictions going back to 1997. And I think that's all.
And I just wanted to add, our other team members, Sarah and Mike, weren't able to join us today, but yeah, they were doing some stuff with Landfire and Tree Map. But unfortunately, we weren't able to add that into this. Hopefully, we get to show that some other time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Team 2. That was awesome. Just fantastic and really cool to see some of those dynamic visuals. I just dropped the survey in again. This is Team 2. You can all take a minute to do that. And then up next we have Team 1. And I believe Team 1, I will be doing screen share for you.
Okay, let's try. Can people hear me okay? I'm got a bad connection. Okay, cool. Cool. So I am the only member of my team that was able to make it today. We got pretty wiped out by the snow and by Cyverse. But I will talk about what we were doing and where we got to with the project. It's been really interesting to see what other people have been doing as well, as I can see some overlap where we've taken a bit of a different angle, so that's nice. Okay, Tyler, if you could go to the slides.
People's slides right now.
Can you change to the next slide? Okay, so our project was looking at this concept of reorganization and post-disturbance recovery. And we focused down on this concept we found really interesting of zombie forests. Yeah, with the shifty shrubs. The team name relates kind of to what we were looking at then. So we were interested in forests that might be kind of stuck in areas that were no longer climatologically suitable, with the idea being then that, like, post-disturbance, these areas would experience a regime shift and go from being a tree-dominated landscape to a shrub-dominated landscape. And what we wanted to understand is where there are like certain climate conditions in this post-disturbance and pre-disturbance period that would effectively be able to predict this. So, like, could we find a relation between the climate and post-disturbance recovery, particularly around these regime shifts? If we could go to the next slide. So we started building a disturbance data set. I think this came from the work by Ethan, who I think has no power at the moment. So this is based on the composite burn index, and we sorted our disturbance sites down into burn severity. We were particularly focused on fire disturbance, and yeah, these were intended to be our sites of interest, which would then, if you go to the next slide. Could we go to the next slide?
One after this.
Thanks. So these sites of interest were then these kind of like like the red polygon areas basically in this. Whoops. Could we go back to the last one? Yeah, so we were looking at disturbance areas, like areas that had been disturbed by fire. And then we were tracking these through time against a suite of climate predictors. So we had a predictor stack, which is what's taken most of our time putting together, where we had the elevation and some terrain measures as well, like slope and aspect. And then we had mean precipitation and mean temperature, like through time, and a pre-disturbance and post-disturbance state. So what we were trying to predict with this predictor stack was the post-disturbance state, with the idea being that we could then forecast kind of like future risk of regime change if an area was to be disturbed using climate forecasts. So if you could go to the next slide. So we pulled together all of these data sets. For the topographic data, we're using the NASA DEM, which we sourced from Planetary Computer. For the climate data, we're using CHELSA, climatologies for high, well, I'm not going to remember that acronym. But CHELSA is a 1 kilometer daily climate data set, which we had from 1999 to 2016. And if you go to the next slide. What we were then doing is, from the date of a disturbance, marking that as a point, and then pulling for that point the next 10 years of climate data. So we have the CHELSA data now as an X-array data set on Cyverse that we could then easily query for like an individual slice of the data to construct these variables. And then, yeah, the intention had been to get this then modeled with a random forest. So our Y value, like our predictors that we were looking to predict, was this post-disturbance recovery type. So whether it starting as tree, following a disturbance, ended up as shrub, tree, or bare ground, like no recovery. Yeah, and our predictor stack was then these climate time series. Unfortunately, this is as far as we got. So I think in the next slides, we just go through like the future work, the next steps of what we were hoping to do with this, which was, yeah, then to generate this tabular data set first and a random forest model, to look at what features were important in terms of the climate time series. Like, we were particularly interested in rainfall in the growing period following immediately on from the disturbance, where we thought that might be a critical factor in determining the long-term trajectory. And yeah, we were hoping to dig into that in more detail, but that's something that we will do in the future when we don't have quite so many disruptions. Cool. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you for being able to make it today and, yeah, carrying your team when I know a lot of people have other disruptions going.
Yeah, all good. Thanks.
So this was team 1. Here's the survey again. I can take a quick look at things before we move on to the next one. Which will be team 5. Team 5, if you want to put up slides or your website or wherever you're going to present from, and we can get them in just a minute.
Okay, let's see how this goes. Oops. Can you guys see my screen? Okay.
See it, and you can get going.
All right. So we are team 5. The team name that we decided on is the Tremendous Smolder Squad, and it consists of Julia Kent, Rachel King, Ryan McCarthy, myself, and Shaig Zhang. And the title of our presentation and our project is Quantifying Above Ground Carbon Across Subalpine Forests of the Southern Rocky Mountains. And so here's our website. It's under the publication or the project presentation under project documentation. And to kind of set the stage of what the area of interest looks like on the ground for you guys, here are some photos of the subalpine forest types in the Southern Rockies. So it mostly consists of lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, subalpine fir, and some aspen here and there. And we chose this forest type for a couple different reasons. There's not as much literature out there on these higher elevation subalpine forests as there are on low elevation forests. And these forests hold a lot of significance. They grow in very harsh conditions, but have rather simple composition, and annual productivity is pretty low, yet they hold some of the largest carbon stocks in Colorado and across this ecoregion. And yet they are susceptible to a lot of different disturbances, both insects and disease and wildfires. And so we know that the disturbance intervals are occurring or are increasing and are getting farther away from their historic fire or historic disturbance regimes. And so we wanted to try to quantify what the what the above ground carbon looks like after different disturbances have happened, and try to get at some things that we can say about how species diversity and species structure, species richness, productivity, all influence the carbon stocks in areas that were disturbed and not disturbed. And so, like I said, these areas hold a lot of significance for carbon stocks, but also for wildlife habitat, ecosystem services, and watershed importance. And so we wanted to kind of get a better grasp and understanding on these different things I just went over. And so our main two research questions that we were able to tailor it down to are, first, how much land has burned from 2002 to 2005 within our study area? And similarly, within our study area, how much land has not seen any disturbances as classified by land fire? And again, our area of interest is subalpine forests. And so that's really between 9,000 feet and 11,500 feet in elevation across the Southern Rockies ecoregion, according to the EPA. And then our second question is, within the subalpine forests of the Southern Rocky Mountains, how does above ground carbon differ in the areas that were burned between this period from 2002 to 2005, and how did it differ from carbon stocks that have not undergone a disturbance within the last 25 years or so, or 1999 to 2020. And so we were looking at a whole variety of different data sources and settled on using 5 different sources. First, we got a layer of the EPA's level 3 eco region Southern Rockies area, which is the shape that we are all familiar with at this point, in order to filter down to our subalpine forests and the forest types we were interested in. We filtered down to this elevation using a DEM file from the USGS, and then we use the NLCD land cover types to further differentiate between deciduous, evergreen, and mixed forest types. And then I will pass it over to Julia real quick to talk more about how our data sources are documented here in the methods.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So we had 5 data sets that we used, and a 6th aspirational data set. So the National Land Cover Database, NLCD, from the USGS. And you'll notice that a lot of these data sets have kind of different specific date ranges or years that work for them, which had to shape our research question and how we moved forward. So we have our land cover, which is used to get the spatial resolution for our ecosystem diagnostics. We used the ecoregion data from the EPA. So this was the only data set that we actually got to use that was not already provided by the Codefest. And it's kind of funny, so I feel like we have to share this, that the data was available on a Tuesday, but by Wednesday, they seem to have taken it down. So we had to do some finagling to make sure the whole team had access to this. Just some classic things that only happen during a hackathon. They could have taken it down any other day. And so there are 967 different ecoregions within the US, and we use this to define our shapefile, the Southern Rocky Polygon. The Landfire LF data set with data from 1999 to 2005, 25 different geospatial layers, including the wildfire disturbances that we're interested in. And we use JEDI data to get our carbon estimates based on the kind of biomass and tree coverage and things like that in the area. And the last data set that we used was kind of a combined data set using the R package elevator. It uses this kind of mixed elevation data from 3 different sources. The terrain tiles, open topography, and a USGS elevation point query. And we had wanted to use some MODIS data to get land cover information, but the request for the data was approved at, I believe, 6 a.m. this morning, so that did not make it into this report in time. And that's the summary of our data.
So then the next step that we worked on was to classify areas that had been hit with a wildfire and were undisturbed within the last 25 years. And so this map 4 and 5 kind of shows that, where map 4 is areas that did see a fire. The blue is between 2002 to 2005. Or sorry, the red is between 2002 to 2005, and then the blue is across all 25 years. And so we really wanted to focus in on the fire events that are in red in order to have enough time since the fire to look at post-fire vegetation and carbon dynamics and the recovery of those systems. And then the gray over here was kind of like our control on map 5, where these are the areas that have not seen any type of disturbance between 1999 and 2020.
Okay, so with those polygons you just saw, we use that to with the JEDI data to overlay and calculate total biomass for the whole Southern Rockies, as well as within our focal region of the high elevation, that 9,000 to 11,500 feet, as well as the within each burn region, how much carbon there was. And just a reminder, so this is just a snapshot in time of carbon based on the JEDI data. So we don't have a time series yet. Our idea was to maybe try to do a chrono sequence to get look at changes over time, but we didn't get that far. So we just have kind of an example of how that would work for this one time period, 2002 to 2005, with the biomass data. And so overall, we found that within our study region, there was about 1,200 kilometers squared of area that burned, and then the amount of area that didn't experience any disturbance during this period was much larger. That doesn't mean it didn't have disturbance earlier, because it's, we didn't go back too far, but this is just after the study period. About 122,000 kilometers squared didn't burn. And then we looked at calculated carbon. This is in trillion metric tons per kilometer squared, and you see that there's higher amounts of carbon during in the undisturbed regions, 3.3, compared to the burned regions, 2.67, and that's these are kind of coarse. These are very preliminary numbers. I wouldn't want to publish these necessarily, but at least gives us a sense that there's less carbon. There's been some recovery. We do think we kind of were surprised that it was as close to the undisturbed region, but again, we didn't get a chance to. We merged in the tree cover database, but we didn't get a chance to actually go through and filter out unforested regions. So that would be one of the next steps, to make sure we're actually comparing forested regions at the start of the period. And additionally, we'd like to use, we haven't done the future analysis, which would be to look at how factors that vary across the region, like forest type, canopy height, different metrics of diversity, whether those could help us identify regions that have lost more carbon or are more threatened by disturbance, to then help managers predict maybe where you could focus management efforts, or which regions are potentially have high carbon but could potentially lose lots of carbon if they were disturbed. But that would be kind of a future direction. but we did at least get some comparison of disturbed and undisturbed regions and recovery. You can scroll down, I think, a bit. So I guess our future steps are, our bullet points are not rendering, but basically we really wanted to separate out forest types next to examine carbon recovery across like deciduous, evergreen, or mixed forest types, bring in additional disturbances. We wanted to look at insects as well as wildfire and their combination. And then bring in additional NPP data to look at dynamics and not just total carbon stocks. So that would be some of our future goals. I don't know if Ashley wanted to bring it home or if that might be just we could apply this to other regions as well, but the subalpine region is pretty understudied, and we hope this would add to our understanding of how the carbon is changing in that region with disturbance.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's kind of a template that can be scaled up to other forest types and regions, and that was one of our intents. And hopefully at one point we can pull in other data sources, or utilize the other ones that we did pull in already and haven't had the time to assess. So there's a lot more, I think, many more questions that we could start to answer with this kind of template that we developed.
Thank you so much. Some of those graphics are cool, and I love that you got to some finalized numbers as much as things are finalized in 2 days. I just posted the survey. This should be team 5. Everyone can take a minute to look at that, and then we will have our last but certainly not least team, team 4.
All right, can folks see team 4's slides? Can I get a verbal yes or no?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, we are team 4. We started with a really simple question. Where are sawmills? And before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what are mills. Mills essentially process wood, logs go in, and wood products come out. There are a bunch of different kinds of mills. The ones that we typically think of are sawmills that take big logs and make lumber, like the sort of antique one shown here. But some mills make pulp for paper or pellets. And you can think of a mill in sort of like a box and arrow diagram where this dashed line delineates the mill. Logs come in. There's carbon in those logs. From those logs, harvested wood products are produced, and sawdust is also produced as a byproduct. And then those products can get shipped off or burned for fuel, or they might be used for something else, but they leave the mill system. And our overarching question here is, what can we learn about carbon fluxes by remotely sensing mills? And there are a bunch of disparate use cases that one can imagine here related to like quantifying the inventory of a mill, trying to understand regulatory compliance, doing market research, carbon projects, demand forecasting. If you want to speculate in sort of timber-related investments, it might be useful to know how much volume different mills have at any given time, and other miscellaneous forms of surveillance capitalism. And we laid out 3 goals. The first one is sort of like the thing we really wanted to get done, which is mapping known mills. To do that, on Tuesday, we found 3 different data sources, one in Colorado, one in Wyoming, and then Ty helped us to scrape some mill locations from OpenStreetMap. These data sets were all different, and they raised as many questions as they answered. Like, we didn't know were they complete lists. Probably they're not. a complete census of all mills. We weren't even sure whether every record in fact was a mill. And furthermore, we wanted to know, like, what do mills look like? And so we sketched out like these 3 different data sources, and we also decided that upon first glance, the OpenStreetMap data were clearly incomplete. So one of the things we wanted to do was, once we map the mills, add those data to OpenStreetMap. So we sort of split the tasks out. We ended up constructing a mill database. Each row in here is one of the things that we found, and then we categorized them as, does this look like a mill or not, based on whether it has visible logs and or sawdust. So here's some examples. This was one of the mapped mills that's clearly not a mill. It's just in a neighborhood. Here's another one in Wyoming where you can see logs that are stacked up. I'll zoom around here for just a quick second. Here's the mill. Here are a bunch of logs waiting to be processed. Here's a big pile of sawdust. And this is a fairly large operation, so you might wonder, like, oh, what can we figure out about the sort of activity of a mill using remote sensing data? And now we've got a map of known mills. Each blue point here is a mill that we've visually interpreted as looking like a mill. In total, we've now got 24 confirmed mills. Many of the other things were like mom and pop shops, or they might have just been small mills that didn't look like mills in aerial imagery. I'm going to hand this off to Liz to talk about how we added these data to OSM.
Yeah, I'll just briefly talk about this, but this is the CSV that Max just showed you is on our GitHub, and we compiled the full list from those 3 data sources and then went in visually to validate it, like Max said, to see if that actually was a mill. And like, for example, on OSM, only 9 mills popped up between Colorado and Wyoming, and 8 of those were slightly different coordinates of the same mill, and it wasn't actually a mill. So went in, validated, found a semi-complete list as much as we can from those 3 data sources. And then next slide, please. And then we can just go ahead and add those to OSM. It was really simple. This was one of the data sources provided to us in the Codefest. And we started out with a simple question, but we were able to answer it using those different sources and then actually contribute to OpenStreetMap so that in the future, people will have a more complete data set. And like I said, it was really simple. You just create an OSM account, go in and edit, and then you can categorize your point as a sawmill and add it to these different tags that we searched initially, including industrial equals sawmill and then craft equals sawmill as well. And I'll pass it back to Max.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. So yeah, we mapped the mills, green check. And now we had 2 stretch goals. First was, can we monitor mills using remote sensing data? And I wanted to try something, we wanted to try something like really simple and be lazy. So we decided to try this like generic segmentation model called Segment Anything. It's running on Cyverse, and there's a Python package that makes this laughably easy called Segment Geospatial. All the things that I'll show are like at most 8 lines of code. But you can prompt via text, like find me the trees, or via points, like here are some points, or you can just segment everything. So first we tried text prompting, and here's an example mill. And the text prompt that I provided was find stacks of lumber or stacks of logs. And here's the mask that was generated. And it's not terrible. You can kind of see like, yeah, it found some stacks of lumber and stacks of logs. Didn't find all of them, but that's better than I would have guessed. The next thing we tried was segmentation via point prompting. So we went in and we just like added points on top of some of these piles, thinking that maybe we can get the model to find those. And when we make predictions, it just finds the whole mill, which was surprising. So then we thought, okay, we'll fix this. We're going to add some negative examples. So we added these red dots, which are not the things we want to segment, made predictions, and then it just looked weirder. So point prompting, apparently not as much information in those point prompts as in our text prompt, which is kind of interesting. And then the last thing was maybe prompting is just something that is hard. What if we just automatically try to find all the objects? And there's this class called the SAM automatic mask generator, which kind of does what you expect. It just finds things that look like unique objects. And this does pretty well. It's not perfect. like it does lump buildings with other things, but yeah, might be of use at some point. And we also tried some stuff in Google Earth Engine, so I'm going to pass this off to Hutch.
Yep. So we moved that data of points into Google Earth Engine just to try an alternative method of supervised classification, using what Google Earth Engine has internally, in those functions. So we randomly selected 75% of the mills to be used as training data. If you can click twice or once, yeah. So we went in and manually drew polygons along the outline of all the logs from NAPE imagery, as you can see on the right, and did that at 18 sites. And the goal was for different classification models. I did random forests and maximum likelihood, and the goal was to classify those other 25% mills, there's only 6 mills, to see how well it does at classifying log pile from non-log. And the result was, if you click one more time or twice, user memory limit exceeded. And this only further reinforces or demonstrates why a product like Cyverse and cloud computing is important. Whenever I tried to run it at a scale that would even recognize the log piles, I got this error. So I'll pass it on to Kit to talk more about Earth Engine classification, but yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of tried to divide and conquer and try different classification algorithms in Google Earth Engine. And I was like, naive Bayes has surprised me before, so why not just try it? So basically, naive Bayes is just like a simple algorithm that looks at pixels and tries to find pixels that most probabilistically match your training set. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So basically 3 main steps were choose imagery. I stuck with the NAPE imagery that we'd already generated. We made a feature collection of 78 training images, and then it was like, run the test. And I was like, if this works, I'm going to be so happy. Next slide. Unfortunately, it did not work. So there was one iteration that I did that I really wish I would have saved. For some reason, it was very good at finding rock quarries in Colorado. So I need to try to find that code. But yeah, in the current iteration, it did fail. Full disclosure, we only worked on it for like maybe an hour or two. So next slide. So there's definitely a lot of improvements that could have been made. So one, more training data. I only used positive data where it was like, try to look for this, but I'm not going to give you anything not to look for, which, isn't really fair to a person or an algorithm. So some things that could be added are logs, things that aren't logs, additional land type covers, so like rock, sand, anything that has a similar spectral signature that it needs to differentiate from. So apparently, potentially rock quarries. And then use different training data. So maybe we could do whole mills, or we can have co-occurrence data set where it's like where there's buildings, sawdust, and logs, try to find this. And potentially different imagery, so Avarice imagery other than NAIP or NAPE. And then also what we all wish we had was more time. So I will hand it back to, I'm not sure who I'm handing it back to, but I will hand it back to whoever is not me.
Awesome. Thank you, Kit, and thank you, Hutch. The last thing that we wanted to try was to see if we could learn something about which mills might be impacted by various kinds of disturbances. The first thing we did is for every mill we mapped, we computed an isochrone, which is basically like, what's the region that you could access if you're willing to drive for a certain amount of time or for a certain distance. We used 62 miles because it was the biggest distance that the Mapbox API would allow us to use. And these brown polygons show these isochrones, basically like where can a mill source lumber from if you're only willing to drive 62 miles. But often you can drive more than that if you're hauling timber. It is expensive though, because logs are heavy. We then overlaid fire polygons from the MTBS data. And with this, you can compute, like for any mill, what's the fraction of that isochrone that's burned? And so we did that. There was one mill in Wyoming where around 10% of that isochrone had burned. And so this is interesting in terms of like, well, maybe you could try to understand how mill operations are impacted by burns, or like, is there some salvage logging that's going to happen there, et cetera. So to summarize, we mapped the known mills. That was the main thing we wanted to do. We got to experiment with mill monitoring using remote sensing with a variety of approaches. And if you want to overlay disturbances, that's super easy to do once you know what region you're working with. All of our code is here. This analysis subdirectory has the bulk of it. And I'm going to pass it off to Hillary now to talk about future directions.
Thanks, Max. So as all the groups have said, if the Codefest were weeks or months or years instead of just a couple days, we'd be diving into this question and these data sets a little bit more. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go over pretty quickly some of the ideas that we have for future directions for this work. So first of all, we're interested in finding unmapped mills using different object detection methods that we've been thinking about. We're also interested in expanding the geographic scope. So right now we just, we're working in Wyoming and Colorado, but we could be interested in applying some of these methods across the US or even globally. And we hypothesize that mills in different geographies might look different spectrally. So we'd want to have training data in different geographies. Additionally, we're interested in exploring other image classification approaches. And then a couple of research questions that we'd be interested in diving into if we had more time was looking at, one would be looking at mill productivity. And we're interested in seeing if we could use the size of a mill facility or the size of the log piles, the size of the sawdust piles as a proxy for mill productivity. And we could validate that with data that's online about like actually ground truthed mill productivity. There's a variety of different data sources out there. They're probably pretty labor intensive to compile, but the data exists because logging is a pretty regulated industry, especially when timber crosses state lines. Another research question that we're interested in is looking at the impact of sawmill area of influence on forest carbon and biodiversity. So we could potentially use the areas that Max was talking about and compare them to matched areas that were not within the sawmill area of influence and see and compare forest carbon and biodiversity. And then lastly, we're interested in looking at new inputs such as hyperspectral data for more spectral specificity. Next slide, please. And that's it. Team 4 Est, I'd like to thank you for your attention and your time over the last few days. It's been great getting to know you all.
Thank you so much, Team 4. Such a cool idea, and you did some amazing execution in just a few days. The survey has been posted for Team 4. Everyone can look through some of their materials and respond to that survey. And then in a few minutes, we will move on to a few words from Naomi and Jennifer. So if you have not yet, remember to give your team a self-evaluation as well. Okay, it looks like most of our responses are in. I'm going to pass it over to, oh, in terms of the self-evaluation, Hutch, you can use that same link and just select your own team's name. And now, Nayani, I'm going to pass it over to you to say a few words, and then you can pass it to Jennifer.
Thank you, Tyler. Wow, amazing 6 presentations. Thank you, teams. I really enjoy all your presentations. That's amazing. I would say, like, what a great way to spend the time on a snowy day. It's amazing. I love all these diverse research questions from management, finding management practices, the zombie forest, like finding how different disturbance interacts and how they change the ecosystems, and carbon recovery, finding sawmills. Wow, amazing. I really enjoy like how you use the data. I see like diverse use of data. I didn't see any team use a single data from like the minimum was 3 and the maximum was 10 different data sets. I really love how you connected those data sets. I really enjoy like finding different models and amazing figures, amazing results. I all enjoyed of this. I think this workshop for 2.5 days, I think within the 2.5 days, you only had like maybe 10, 12 hours to work together. Like within that time frame, you had to like define your questions, find the potential data, coding, analyzing, updating GitHub, making your presentation, and also present so many different things. You are very fast and incredible researchers. I really enjoyed that. I would say like, thank you. Thank you for sharing all this amazing work. Great teamwork. Yeah, way to go. Thank you. Yeah, I also want to suggest like, maybe like, you should think of like publishing this one. So maybe like in some ways, yes, they're all amazing. Thank you. I pass to Jennifer with that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
So I have a visiting helper here today. I know some of you are juggling some stuff in the background, as am I. Julian has been busy building a snow fort, but he came in to get some hot cocoa and he wanted to help me share my final closing thoughts too here. Just a note of thanks. You all have put in some amazing effort in the last couple of days, and it's really impressive. I'll echo Nayani's thoughts too, that it's amazing to see what y'all have accomplished in 2 days. I mean, it's like, wow, that's a paper, that's a paper, that's a paper. So definitely continue to pursue these ideas and work with your teams if it feels good and feels right and you all want to keep doing it. And some of our objectives are a bit beyond just what you could accomplish in a couple of days too. I think, you know, part of what we're hoping to do is lay the foundations for teams and team building and teamwork, and connecting you all with a community of people who are working on this question and allied questions. So I am hoping that you'll take the energy from this meeting and continue the relationships and pursue the ideas that you've done here. So Julian was going to help me with wrapping up some closing thoughts. So do you want to start with this first one here? Can you start with that?
Okay.
Okay.
Data on forests is cool.
Data on forests is cool.
Sometimes the race car stalls out.
Sometimes the race car stalls out.
Walking in teams is fun. I love hot cocoa, snow days, and puppies.
So hopefully those are like some good words to live by. And Julian is also practicing his reading. Good job. So those are my thoughts. And Julian's has been helping and listening to the logging presentation with y'all too. So he was pretty excited about some of the images y'all came up with. So those are my thoughts. Tyler, did that give you enough time to tally the scores? Are you good or do you need some more time?
Thank you so much for that. And I don't know that we should say too much more after those fantastic closing words from Julian. So I've taken these scores, added them up, and then I've also normalized by the number of responses, since I know we lost a few individuals over the course of this morning, from people losing power to kids to whatever it might be. So we have a crowned winner, which is Team 6. Congratulations. People were very impressed by a lot of your work, but I think my main takeaway from looking at this is just how amazing everybody's done looking at these histograms of the responses. It's, yeah, mostly like 8s and 9s for your scientific questions, 7s and 8s for the creativity and innovation happening. People were all very impressed by one another's work. So just, yeah, thank you all so much for being willing to participate in this event. It was a lot of fun for us to get to see you working in person and using all of some of these tools that we've put together for you. And more than anything, we hope that you will all stay in touch. Certainly connect to ESIIL, get on our email lists, look out for future events, and hopefully this can spark some continued conversations and maybe even working groups or collaborations. I also wanted to say a huge thank you to Nyani and Katie, both, who were sort of my partners in crime for the planning and setting up of this whole event. Katie was the one who kept you all well fed and watered during the event, and Nyani helped mastermind so much of this behind the scenes. So thank you all so much. And yeah, with that, go enjoy a lot of snow that is only continuing to come down.
And thank you, Tyler.
Thank you, Tyler.
Hello again.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Tyler. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.